Hello and welcome to the online recording of Hertfordshire Virtual Schools Understanding Attachment and Trauma Informed Practice in the Learning Environment. This is going to be delivered in two parts. So session 1 or session A is going to be delivered by myself, Denise, and part 2 is going to be delivered by my colleague, Hannah. So why are we here today to look at what training? So the aim of this training is to understand how an early years setting, how schools environments can actually look at becoming an attachment aware and trauma informed school, and what do these principles look like. So hopefully you'll be able to share this recording with your colleagues to actually to develop an understanding of the foundations for our children. So this will help schools to respond to the needs of children that are currently looked after by the local authority or previously looked after by the local authority, because these children are more likely to have experienced difficulties around attachment and trauma. That being said, that these difficulties may have also been experienced by a lot of our children that are in our settings. So it's going to help us look at supporting a wider group of children within our population and to be able to respond to the needs in a more trauma-informed way. So by the end of the session, you'll be able to define the impact of childhood trauma can have on the learning experience, identify how attachment and traumatic experiences may affect a child in the learning environment, and to evaluate the effects of attachment aware and trauma informed practice. So hopefully by the end of this online training, we'll have met all of these outcomes. So childhood trauma. So more than 1 in 3 children and young people are exposed to at least one potential traumatic event by the age of 18. And what's also a fact that we've also got to take into consideration now, COVID, it's now said that every child has now experienced at least one trauma since COVID. So due to the experiences of COVID, all of our children in our settings have experienced a traumatic event because of the impact that the pandemic has had. So what I'd like you to do is just to take a few minutes just to think how many children in your class may have been impacted by trauma. So what this activity is going to get us to do is, okay, look at our cohorts. What are the needs within our cohorts? Okay, so just take a couple of minutes, stop the video and just think how many children within our class, our room, have experienced an impact of trauma. So now you've reflected on how many children within your room or your classroom may have experienced trauma. We're now going to focus on the term trauma. What does trauma mean? So psychological trauma is a type of harm to the brain that occurs as a result of a severely distressing event or prolonged neglect / childhood abuse. So I think for the key to remember about trauma is that trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds a person's ability to cope. So it's a personal trauma. So you may have experienced something, and for you, your brain and your nervous system may not have processed that situation as trauma, but for another person, that experience may have changed the chemical structure within their brains, their nervous system, and for them that was actually a traumatic event. So trauma is individual. That's the key to remember here. So the memory of trauma event can be very overwhelming. So what we're going to now look at, that actually how can that experience be triggered, actually make us maybe relive and feel them feelings. So it's really important to remember how smells, sounds, touch, visual reminder can actually make someone actually feel again worried, scared, frightened, confused. So it's actually thinking about, okay, so are we being conscious about smells within our settings, the sounds, touch and visual stimuli. Okay, so when a child has experienced trauma and actually say they smell and it makes them go back to an experience where they felt scared, worried and frightened, they're then going to feel scared, worried and frightened within your learning environment. So, and what can happen then is that this child would then feel dysregulated, and often we talk about dysregulation, but what does that actually mean? So dysregulation is actually when you're not able to adjust appropriately to the environment. So you could internalize, you could externalize. So actually it's that kind of osmosis that actually, how are we actually doing these things? So it's just remembering that trauma arises from adverse childhood experiences for our children within our settings. So what could happen if we have unsupported trauma, if children aren't getting the support that they need due to the experiences that they've had? So a quite worrying fact, in the last 3 years, the likelihood of young people having a mental health difficulty or need has increased by 50%. So that need, recognising it as a need, as a school, as a setting, what are we doing to make sure that we're identifying mental health, and we're actually putting processes in place to actually support our children. So now 5 children in every class of 30 are likely to have poor mental health. So again, going back to looking at our policies, our processes, are we putting a support in early, so we're actually helping our children because of their trauma that they've experienced. So now we're going to do a little activity. So I'll read out the different parts for you, and then pause the video, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So the activity. So I want you to think about what made you become a teacher or an early years educator. When you were at school, did you have one trusted adult? And what were their qualities? How did they make you feel? So again, this is kind of looking at, why did we want to work with children? Do we like children? Do we actually want to help them flourish and meet their full potential? So when we were at school, did you have a trusted adult? Was there an adult there that you felt safe with? Was there an adult there that actually helped you grow and develop? What were their qualities? Were they kind? Were they thoughtful? Did they make you feel safe? Is the big one. How did they make you feel? Did they make you feel safe and secure? So just take a couple of minutes to think about them questions, because what we're really trying to look at is that actually, are we getting the connection before correction? So actually, are we enabling that attachment approach? Actually, we're allowing our children to feel safe, we're allowing our children to feel secure. So just have a think about why it is you do your job that you made, and your own experiences. I hope that previous activity gave you just some thoughts about your own experiences, and maybe just to sit there and think, oh, I wonder how these children will remember me within 5 to 10 years. What will they say about me? So we're now going to move on to an activity. So again, think about it, take some time, pause the video, and then my colleague Hannah will come back to this activity at the end of part 2. So on a blank piece of paper, I'd like you to write the 4 most important things in your life, 1 in each corner. Okay, and then you do not have to share this with anybody. So just pause the video and just think about, what are the 4 most important things to me. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to think about the 4 things which are most important to you. Now, I'd just like you to take a couple of minutes to think, okay, what if you never see these things again? If these 4 things that are written in the corner of your paper, you never saw them again, they were taken away. Okay, how might that make you feel? How might you behave if these were taken away? Okay, so just have a little think about personally how you might feel, how you might behave, what your outcomes might be. Okay, so again, if you feel like you need to pause the video for some reflection, please feel free to pause the video if need be. Okay, now we're going to look at, what does being trauma aware mean? What does it look like? So the golden thread, the key principle to this, is actually that it's an acknowledgement that we are first and foremost hardwired for survival. So it's understand that actually, how does our brain and our nervous system process situations? What does that look like for us? And that's why actually that the phrase that I said within the last in the last activity, connection before correction, how does that actually help us? If we're hardwired for survival, how does that connection make us feel safe, and it makes us feel secure, and it makes us feel calm, and it makes us feel relaxed? Okay, so it's looking at, okay, how does being trauma aware, how can we look at them feelings? So this means that much of what what could be labelled as mental health, mental ill health, bad behaviour, poor choices, irresponsible decision making. Actually, if we look at it's all instinct, it's all survival instinct, so out of context. So if we thought about our classroom environment, so you may have a child that's on the carpet and actually I feel scared, worried and frightened. So my instinct is I'm hardwired to survive. So what am I going to do? I'm going to try to escape that situation. So I've got to do what I've got to do so I can feel safe. So I may have to bite the child next to me. I may have to hit them. I may have to push them. I may have to swear. So it's actually understanding that that isn't bad behaviour, that actually that's that child's instinctive behaviour because they feel scared, they feel worried and they feel frightened. And that's things like a supportive approach, being curious about what the behaviour, so that analysing, so that example that I gave you, analysing that behaviour. Why does that child feel scared, worried and frightened? What's that? So what is that behaviour telling us to do? Can we create a safe space? Can we create that attachment so that child feels secure? And are we providing de-escalation practices? So that's just trying to get us to think about, okay, being trauma aware deep down is that acknowledgement that actually us as human beings, we're hardwired for survival. So actually the question is, what has happened? How can I help? Are the questions that we're actually looking for, that as adults we should be asking ourselves. So looking at attachment, what is attachment? So a child's need to make a secure attachment with the main significant adult or adults in their life from a very early stage, and then have a consistent and warm relationship from there onwards throughout childhood for emotional and physical good health. So attachment is key. It's building them foundations. So what happens if we have children within our classroom, within our setting, within our environment, that they've had experiences that have had early difficulties or disruption when it comes to attachment? How that might look, going back to that question, what is that behaviour telling us? Actually, it might actually tell us that actually they feel scared, they feel worried, they feel frightened because they've never learned that adults can make me feel safe and secure, that adults have never taught me about co-regulation and therefore regulation. So attachment is key to actually, are we a setting that's providing that attachment so a child can feel, going back to them feelings, safe and secure. So we're going to look at the impact of trauma. And I think this is the point that we start actually identifying that actually the impact of trauma and attachment actually affects the brain development and the nervous system. So the impact of trauma, so sometimes prolonged exposure to adverse childhood experiences, which we're going to cover later on, can impact the child's attachment to the primary caregiver and later be diagnosed as an attachment disorder. So actually, whereas some of our children, adults make us feel safe and secure, for some children, adults can make them feel frustrated, confused and worried. So as a education provider, what are we doing to make our children teach them the skills, actually going back to them developmental points? So this may not always be the case. The brain is remarkably resilient, and due to the neuroplasticity, with the right trusted adult at the right time, children and young people can overcome diversity. And again, that's key for your early identification, your early intervention, that actually, are we providing an opportunity where we're seeing that attachment, that attention as a need, and we're providing it not as a reward but as a provision. It's needed for this child. We're helping redevelop them pathways within the brain. So actually, if that, going back to that phrase, connection before correction, are we providing that connection to help our children? So following on from the previous slide where I did mention about an attachment disorder, so what is an attachment disorder? What does it look like? Again, it's not our role within early years within schools to actually be being given diagnosis of early attachment disorder, but it's something to be aware of. So an attachment disorder is a broad term intended to describe disorders of the mind, behaviour and social relationship arising from a failure to form normal attachment to primary caregivers in early childhood. So if we break that down, maybe think about some children that may have been looked after by the local authority, that may have previously been looked after, that children that may have had a parent that maybe been incarcerated or had their own high level of mental health need, suffered a bereavement. Actually, if I did I have that opportunity to develop that attachment with that key caregiver during my early years of life? So such a failure would result from early experiences of neglect, abuse, abrupt separation from caregivers between the age of 6 months to 3 years. So frequent or excessive numbers of caregivers or lack of caregivers response to the child's communication effects resulted in the lack of trust. And later on we're going to look at, okay, how could then an infant become frustrated if they're communicated, I feel scared, I feel frightened, I'm angry, and they've not got that adult that makes them feel safe and secure. And I think the key to remember is a personal attachment style is established before the age of 3. Okay, so anything that happens after the age of 3 actually it could be a traumatic event for that person, but it's not going to affect their attachment style. So remembering what age children are you working with? Are you working with children in early years? Are you working with older children? But are we still identifying actually children need adults to make them feel safe and secure? Do they have that opportunity to develop that attachment with someone where they feel safe and secure, so they're actually able to thrive and actually help and support with that brain development? So actually I can help you feel safe and I can help you feel secure. So early experiences of trauma. So children may have experienced trauma at a time when they do not have any words. So if you work with early years children, developmentally they may not have a lot of vocabulary, so they may not have the words to be able to communicate to you. So therefore they're going to use their behaviour to let you know that they feel worried, scared, frightened, confused. So again, every behaviour is a communication. It's that golden thread. Behaviour is a communication. Are we analysing the behaviour? Are we looking at what support this child needs to actually make sure that they feel safe? Does this child need support to understand that actually I can be trusted? I am here to help you. So if we looked at the Romanian orphanages, actually we had that babies were crying and nobody came to them, so therefore they knew that actually I won't cry because nobody comes. But yet there was this one baby that was near the caretaker's cupboard, so every day that baby was being interacted with by that adult, and what the research showed was actually that baby actually flourished very well because that had that one adult that was able to interact with them to make them feel safe, that's able to feel secure. Okay, so that's why going back to what experiences did our children experience and how can we then go back to that stage to support them actually is key within this approach. So now we're going to watch a video and then I'll discuss after the video's played, but please at any point if you need to, please pause the video, have time for some reflection, time away, and then just come back when you feel comfortable. Okay, so again, that key phrase, that connection before correction, and that's just an example of actually the importance of adults, and actually going back to, okay, adults make that made that baby feel safe and secure, but at points in that video, that adult also made that baby feel confused, worried, and frightened. So it's just remembering, okay, what are our pre-experiences of our children?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
Oh, you my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So this slide illustrates the disturbed attachment style, so the cycle. So baby has a need, baby cries, needs not met by the caregiver, and then trust does not develop, rage develops instead, and then that cycle just continues. So baby has a need, baby cries, need not met by caregiver, then trust does not develop, then rage develops instead. So that cycle, that is continuous, and that's how for some of our children, think about how many experiences when they were hungry, or they needed their nappy changing, they cried, nobody responded. Therefore, I don't trust adults. I feel scared, I feel worried because they're not helping me survive. Remember, going back to one of the early slides, human beings are hardwired for survival, so that baby learns strategies to actually make sure that they survive. So that's why this relationship is so important. Actually, within our reception classes, within our nursery, preschools, year 1 classes, are we providing opportunities that actually we're going back to attachments? So the child, at this point, if we change it, so the child has a need, the child communicates to us that they feel scared, they feel worried, they feel frightened, but this time the needs are met by that adult. So therefore trust can start to develop, and therefore that child, it's not frustration, so that child starts to feel safe. Okay, so you're starting to look at that cycle. Okay, how can we kind of develop that for our children? So we now got to look at trauma and stress. So we've just got to look at stress. So as human beings, we all have exposure to stress. Sometimes stress can be a good thing. Sometimes stress can actually help us maybe try something new because the chemicals have changed a little bit. But actually it's actually looking at, okay, what could be positive stress, what is tolerable and what is toxic. Okay, so positive, brief increase in heart rate, mild elevation in stress hormones. So normally if you have a short experience of that, you're like, oh, yes, that change got me through it and I was able to cope. So tolerable. Serious but temporary stress response, buffered by supported relationships. So yes, you may have experienced something which was very stressful, but you've got them supportive relationships. They made you feel safer. They actually was able to teach you the skills maybe to problem solve, to think, actually, what could I do next time? How can I overcome this? And the key is that supportive relationships. So it was through them supportive relationships that actually meant that was tolerable for you. So toxic, so the prolonged application of the stress response system in the absence of protective relationships. So you haven't got someone that makes you feel safe, that's secure, and actually help to look at, okay, how can we maybe teach skills to move forward. Actually you're responding with them survival instincts. Okay, so it's at that toxic stage where actually, what have I got to do to survive? Okay, so it's just looking at, okay, what are our children within our settings feeling? So do some of our children, are they able to have positive stress? And for some of our children, if we look at it, could actually be toxic. And again, what does trauma and stress look like for these children? At one of the very start of the slide, I said about trauma being individual. So actually something like, or we normally have story time after we've had snack, but today we've not got story time, we're going out into the garden. For some of your children, that actually may be a very, very stressful time, because that makes them feel scared, worried, frightened, confused. They don't know what's happening. So again, take that personalised approach when we're looking at kind of trauma and stress levels and where our children are. But the key is actually analysing and go back, what is that behaviour communicating to them? So for next time, again, so you're looking at the support, so next time we can help that child feel safe, secure. Again, so it's them supportive relationships. So this is starting to look at, okay, that analysing aspect. How might you know if a child has suffered some form of trauma? What might you notice within your observations, within your assessments? So you might have noticed they have difficulties in forming and maintaining relationships. That actually, adults, we go back to that cycle with the baby. Actually, I can't trust adults, so therefore I'm going to try to push them away. So, or I need an adult continuously to make me feel safe and secure. What is our observations of analysing their relationships saying to us? Forming a positive self-image. Do they have low self-esteem? Are they able to take risks within their learning? Or actually, I've got to refuse to I've got to find my escape mechanism to actually get away from this learning opportunities, because I can't risk getting it wrong. I'm told that I'm unwanted, I'm not liked, I'm unloved, I'm the naughty child in brackets. So actually I'm then to try then behave like that, because that's kind of going down the self-fulfilling prophecy. So managing and coping stress, are they able to manage and cope with stress, or do they become dysregulated and actually I feel scared, worried and frightened? Again, I think as adults, we can sit there and think, actually, information retention. Think of a time when you was very stressed, and then I turn up, knocked at your front door and said, right, I'm now going to teach you a new language that you've never learnt before. Do you think you would have been able to take that information in? That's the same for our children. So again, what language are we using? Do we give lots of instructions? Are we simplifying a language, breaking it down, looking at them, what could we do? So yeah, has difficulty keeping retaining information. Problem solving, again, to be able to problem solve, you've got to feel safe, secure, you've got to be ready to learn. So for some of our children that have experienced trauma, actually things like problem solving, social negotiation and problem solving is a big one. Are they able to do that? or do we actually, we've got to work on, actually we've got to do that connection first, and then look, okay, how can we then teach the skills so that they're able to socially negotiate and problem solve. Okay, so what you might notice, I think most people have kind of heard from the freeze, fight or flight response. So if a child has experienced trauma, they're dysregulated, actually they have their freeze response, they have their fight response, or they have their flight response. Okay, so that's how their instinct, so my instinctive, again, we're hardwired for survival, so their brain is telling them this is what I've got to do to survive in this situation. So being overwhelmed by sight, sound and touch, again, different touches. So a child, like, so you may just put your hand on a child's shoulder, and actually that makes them feel scared, because they don't know what's going to happen next, because they haven't had the opportunity to know that adults can be safe and secure and they can trust adults. So therefore they then feel scared, worried and frightened, and they may respond within their fight instinct, maybe by biting your hand. So it's, yeah, they could be overwhelmed by touch, sight and sounds. And also you've got hypervigilant, so they're always on high alert, that their brain is learned to function in a way of, actually, I've got to continuously scan this room to make sure that no predator is going to attack me. It's how our brain and our nervous system has developed over time. So for me, and I say this a lot throughout my work, the children who seem to go from 0 to 60 actually live higher up their mountain, so they're on high alert, they're continuously looking, because of their brain is going, we've got to survive this situation. So for children that escalate quite quickly, that lets you know that actually these children don't feel safe, they don't feel secure. So what can we do to help them and learn that we're here to help them flourish and keep and first to feel safe. So here is just an MRI scan that shows imagery of 2-year-olds. So as you can see, so you've got a lot more red movement on the normal nurturing environment and caregiving of a child, and then you've got a child that's actually been deprived of a nurturing environment, and you can see that actually you've got the frontal lobe and the back lobes. This is when the kind of like the neuroscience of, okay, attachment and trauma and how it affects the brain development. So what this is kind of saying, that actually if we're wanting children to be able to problem solve, make decisions, to be creative, to be able to socially interact, to develop their language, to be able to tell a child that actually I would like to play with you, or can I have a turn, they've got to be using their frontal lobe. And as you can see from them pictures, depending on what their experiences have been, will be depending on kind of what part of their brain that they're working on. So that's why when we're looking at that connection before correction, how can we make you feel safe and secure, actually if we get them principles right, you'll be able to transfer children using from their survival part of their brain, and which we'll cover later on in some slides, to the frontal lobe, where actually that's where kind of the language, the problem solving skills can be developed. So, and we've got an image that kind of supports the 2 MRI scans that we've just looked at. So I'm going to start on the survival state, so the brainstem, am I safe? So some of our children, they'll be using a lot of their brain function within this kind of, they'll be using this part of their brain to that instinctive behaviours. Am I safe? Am I secure? How do I survive? And then you've got the blue part, the emotional state, so am I loved? So for a lot of children that may have experienced some adverse childhood experiences, some trauma, some stress, so the key will actually be looking, okay, how are we supporting the emotional state, how are we making sure that they feel safe and secure, they feel loved and they feel valued. So then they'll be able to transfer to actually using more kind of their frontal lobe. So what can I learn from this? So what skills can we look at teaching, so that they're able to learn maybe what language to use in concept. So I'm now going to play a video that gets us to think survival brain versus learning brain. So I think these are going to be the key. So when we're working with children that may have experienced some trauma, some attachments, some adverse childhood experiences, are we providing provision that actually recognises we've got to help children transfer from their survival thinking to their learning thinking. So this is a lovely video just to watch that really explains the point very well.
Hey, welcome back. Today, I really want to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it, I could just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So the learning brain is the brain that's all learning new information, and it's and grades and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony to look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and they're really curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just like a learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might become a little bit better. A survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on the threat. It doesn't play anything. It wants clear flares and survival wagers. It doesn't want anything to be great at all. Emotionally, even with the survival brain makes people feel overthinking, feel empty, obsessive, afraid of doing things wrong, and they don't feel confident in doing new exploration they can go on. And people in survival brain also are afraid of making mistakes, and they are afraid of being stupid too. So students in survival brain don't really be careful and they raise their hand especially if they're stupid. So these people are also thinking they might not have the ability to learn and stuff, or they're afraid that other people will think it's stupid and whatever. Naturally, people understanding learning brain and survival brain are weird, because the survival brain always feels living brain. It makes sense because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know that guy who has to push a rock up a hill every day and falls back down and he has to do it over and over again. Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And Sisyphus is trying to push you. Well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger the world gets. And it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, you can't give yourself control just yet. Stress doesn't mean rigid and intense thing. It's something controllable. And having less stress makes it really organic and overwhelmed. Because people are truly misperceiving people situations as so stressful. They won't just stand for that long too. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, the more easier it is to be learning brain as that really important part. And we really know how to teach ourselves that the best way to keep students in learning brain is not to provide a sense of distracted or danger. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by others around them. So it's kind of like creating a world where all the rules nature shows us, and maybe it feels like playing with waves or exploring trucks or anything like that really hard. And the only reason why they don't do that is because there's a whole other world of things that we aren't getting, which are completely unrelated to danger. So can't control other rules like in survival brain is kind of like being an animal who doesn't have the freedom that humans would have. They can't pull out of thin air because their nature is based on predator and danger. So this is why a well-rounded nervous system, obviously our thought is really important and how you terrorize or weaken is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big Mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, eventually it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions after this time. Thanks.
So what I think is important to take away from that video is, are we mama elephants?
Hey, welcome back. Today I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know, that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again? Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now, the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now, the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn, and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks.
So how do we help children to feel safe and secure with us. So the first thing is actually to identify that attachment is not the problem, it's the solution. Again, connection before correction. If a child has that attachment, they feel safe, they feel secure. Actually, that's the approach that we are wanting to take. So actually feeling safe and secure with the adults within their classroom, within their room, actually will help a child to co-regulate their emotions and then to regulate their emotions. Because again, going back from that survival brain to learning brain, they're feeling safe, they're feeling secure. That's why it's key. Remember, the neuroscience here actually helping go from that survival thinking to the learning thinking. So attachment is how we feel safe and secure, helping us make sense of the world around us. So attachment is the key. So attachment is the solution. So I've got a little thing to remember. So children who are loved come to school, nursery or preschool, ready to learn. So this slide covers 3 out of the 4 attachment styles and responses. So if you've got the insecure, so the child learns that they are only sometimes lovable, so work really, really hard to please you. So you've got the insecure avoidant. The child learns they are not lovable, so they shut down, they retreat, they make themselves invisible. So that's your kind of, maybe they're internalising their kind of feelings. And you've got your disorganised. So the child learns to keep safe. Their first response is to attack and then to run away. So this is actually looking at, okay, so if we've got children within our setting, that we can actually think about, actually, are they ambivalent? Are they avoidant? Are they disorganised? Okay, so what can we do? What are the keys? And hopefully so far you've realised, actually, are we doing that connection? Are we building on them attachments? We're making them feel safe and secure to actually help them with the daily stresses of being within your learning environment. So as you can see, we've now got the 4th attachment style and response. So the secure, the child feels safe and is able to seek reassurance from adults and is emotionally available to learn. So you're going to have some children within your setting that they're secure. So actually, I feel safe. If I need you, I can go to you. I know I can go to you because you make me feel safe. I can trust you. Going back to that, to the attachment cycle for that baby, they didn't know that they could trust adults. So actually, how can we help? Going back to what can we do? How can we make you feel safe and secure so you can trust us? So we can help you get to. So we can actually help you with your learning and being ready to learn. So they're the 4 different attachment styles that you may see for children within your settings. So now it's just an activity, so pause the video for 3 minutes, just to think, are there any children in our school, within our setting, that spring to mind that I could put in? Maybe the ambivalent, actually, yes, this child does sometimes know that they're lovable, so they work really, really hard to please you. Or have you got children that fall within the avoidance, that actually they've learned that they're not lovable, so they shut down, they retreat, they make themselves invisible? Or do you have children that are disorganised, that they learn to actually keep safe? My first response is to attack and then to run away. And then within part 2, Hannah will look at, okay, what different strategies and interventions may we be able to put for maybe some of these children. But remember, the key, actually, are we providing that attachment? Are we looking at the importance of the adult into helping that child to be able to regulate, to feel safe and feel secure, and providing experiences for that child so they can feel like they can achieve? So I'll just give you 3 minutes, so please pause the video. So this slide is just starting to get us to look at how might your existing behaviour policy affect children with attachment difficulties and or childhood trauma. So this is just a chance to just have a look at, okay, what is our policy? Does our policy recognise that actually we're going to take a solution focused approach, that we're going to analyse behaviour, that behaviour is a communication? So what are these children communicating to us? Does your policy recognise that we're going to actually see adults as that connection before correction, that we want children to feel safe, we want children to feel secure? So just have a look at your policies, and actually does our policy reflect everything that we've discussed within this training so far? And if not, it might be worthwhile just reflect on it and saying, okay, what adaptations may we be able to make to our current policy? So now you can see the little coffee cup on the slide, that's a break. So I would suggest that you just have a 10-15 minute break, because we have covered a lot. We have explored some experiences that our children may have experienced that may have affected us, made us feel a little bit sad, a little bit worried or confused. So take some time just to think about, okay, what we've covered, and how we can move forward. Okay, what provision can we support so our children feel safe and secure? Thank you for listening for the first part, and the second part my colleague Hannah will look at adverse childhood experiences and some interventions that may be able to support some of our children within our settings.
Brain development is much more than a story about biology. From the earliest years, relationships with others play a key role in shaping how our brain grows and develops. Early relationships, where there is abuse and neglect, have a long-term impact on children. A brain that has adapted to survive in a threatening or unpredictable world may not work so well in an ordinary environment. This can create what is called latent vulnerability, where early abusive or neglectful experiences with carers put children at greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in the future. For these children, compared to their peers, common experiences like moving to a new school can feel more daunting and stressful. New faces can appear threatening, while positive social cues can be missed. It can be harder to negotiate new social situations and learn to trust new people. Even fun experiences like joining a new sports team can be challenging. Too much focus on potential threat cues can mean missing out on positive social cues such as a playful nudge. Or it causes an overreaction, which leads to an increased risk of conflict and sometimes violence. These reactions can increase the likelihood of generating new stressful events. It's harder to deal with everyday challenges when you feel unconfident and anxious inside, and harder to build and maintain relationships. Over time, this can mean a child loses friends and the support of adults, and so misses out on opportunities to grow and develop. This social thinning can increase the risk of mental health problems in the future. Neuroscience research is beginning to shed new light on how vulnerability unfolds over a child's life. All children need care and stimulation from adults who value them and who show them attention and love. These experiences shape a child's brain development. When children face traumatic experiences like abuse and neglect, their brain adapts to help them cope. We know of changes in 3 different brain systems: the reward, memory, and threat systems. Experiences of domestic violence or physical abuse can lead to hypervigilance, where the brain reacts more to threat. This might help a child stay safe in an early adverse environment, but it can cause problems in more ordinary environments. Hypervigilance can best be understood as a pattern of adaptation, rather than a sign of damage. Abuse and neglect can also mean a world where a child's basic needs for care and attention are not met. This can shape the brain's reward system, the part of the brain that helps us learn about positive aspects of our environment and motivates our behaviour. Over time, the brain's reward system can learn to respond differently to things like positive social cues. Neuroscience studies have also pointed to changes in the autobiographical memory system, our memory of everyday past experiences. Following trauma, negative memories appear to become more salient, which means they become more prominent than positive ones, and everyday memories can also become less detailed. This is a problem because we need to draw on past experiences to help us deal with new social situations. Neuroscience research is showing how childhood trauma can create latent vulnerability, increasing the risk of later mental health problems like anxiety and depression. This vulnerability is not just located in the child, but arises through their relationships. Helping children who have experienced trauma still requires ordinary boundaries and consequences, but it also requires us to step back and reflect and see behaviour that we find challenging in a different light. A child may simply be doing their best to survive now, with brain adaptations from the past. We know a child's brain has the capacity to continue to adapt. For this to happen, they need our help to build and maintain trusted relationships, manage everyday stresses, and prevent new ones from happening. We need to encourage them to try again and believe things can be different. This is far from an easy task and takes time. Science is helping reframe our understanding of childhood trauma. Seeing children's behaviour in a new light can mean we respond differently. But there is much still to learn. Working together, we can develop more effective approaches that promote resilience and recovery. We can help children build trusting relationships and create opportunities for their brains to adapt in new ways.
I wasn't born angry, but I learned to be angry. I wasn't born a vandal, but I smashed up my classroom. I wasn't born rude, but I told my teacher to piss off.
I wasn't born silent, but I learned to keep my mouth shut. I wasn't born invisible, but I didn't want to be seen. I wasn't born anxious, but everything was frightening.
I wasn't born a liar, but I learnt how to lie. I wasn't born a show-off, but I needed to get attention. I wasn't born a doormat, but I'd do anything to help.
I was lucky. At school.
At college.
In the infants, I had a teacher.
A teacher.
A teacher.
Who listened.
Who understood.
Who made a difference.